Good afternoon to everyone just joining us. We're going to have an excellent webinar for you in just a few minutes. We're going to give it a minute or two to let folks join in, but then we'll get started. So just sit tight for 1 minute and then we'll kick things off. All right, we'll just give it a few more seconds. Folks are still joining. Okay, perfect. We'll go ahead and get started knowing it's going to take people a minute or two, but we can get going in the interest of time and making sure there's lots of time for Q&A because we very much encourage lots of Q&A. So to get things started, I'd like to say welcome to another Mass Medic webinar. I'm Rachel Robinson, Chief Operating Officer and guest representative for this webinar. I'm happy to be doing this. It's been a while since I've been handling webinars, but I'm happy to jump in, especially with things that are so interesting like the one that we're going to talk about today. I think a lot of you know that my background is in engineering and design, and so I find things like this very, very interesting. So we're going to have a webinar today on building smarter devices with integrated systems, and I'm so thrilled that our team at Galero has suggested this topic for you all. So just a little bit of housekeeping. We want to make sure that we do have a robust discussion. So please pop your Q&A into the Q&A button at the bottom of Zoom. I know everyone's very familiar with Zoom at this point, but it's easier to put it in the Q&A section than the chat because it's easier for the host to see. We will have a dedicated time at the end of the session for folks to answer those questions. So we very much encourage that. If you have any technical issues, feel free to shoot us a note and let us know, but hopefully you're seeing and hearing everything the way that's intended. This webinar is recorded, so we will be sending out a link with the YouTube link probably tomorrow. It does take a little bit of time for YouTube to upload these, but we will make sure that you all get a copy of this session. And I think that's it from a webinar FAQs. A couple things that I do want to make you aware of from a Mass Medic perspective. We have a number of events coming up this fall that we'd love to see you at. So I encourage you to go to massmedic.com and check out things. We have a member mixer, a Women in MedTech, a golf tournament, as well as several MedTech conferences that we're partnering in September and October. So I strongly encourage you to go to our website and take a look at our upcoming events. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to kick things over to John. I will be here if you need anything, but John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. All right. So my name is John Hayes. I'm Director of Integrated Systems for Galero, a Sonar Group company. I bring with me over 15 years of product development experience. My role here at Galero is I oversee our electromechanical team. And I've got a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Clarkson University. And my previous experience is in surgical robotics working with infusion pumps and inhalation devices, to name a few. Michael?
Hi, pleasure to meet you. I'm Michael Marks. I have a Master's of Science in Biomedical Engineering, as well as my undergrad from the University of California, Irvine. I got my start working as a microscope builder at the Beckman Laser Institute and moved on to be a government contractor before I've been at Galero for the past 5 years. I specialize in the development of complex electromechanical equipment. My background is in optics, so I integrate electronics and mechanical design quite frequently. And at this point, I lead cross-functional teams for early stage product dev.
Who are we? We're Sonar. And within Sonar, we have 2 design centers, Galero and Springboard. I'm dialed in here from our Galero office here in Durham, North Carolina. And we are 830 people strong across the world. And we cover a broad suite of therapeutic areas and devices, drug delivery, diagnostics, medtech. We work on infusion pumps, inhalation devices, wearable devices. We develop surgical instruments and disinfection systems, to name a few. And so what we're excited to talk about with you today is the development of smarter devices, smart devices that require seamless integration between software and hardware. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to deliver better care to our patients. It helps us provide greater insight to our clinicians and ultimately to improve healthcare outcomes.
All right. So I'd like to begin discussion with talking about the importance of patient monitoring. It can be said that vitals are, in fact, vital. Let's take a brief look at a generalized hospital environment. If you walk through any given hospital in your local area, what are the things you're going to hear? I imagine you're going to hear a lot of beeping, a lot of buzzing, a lot of ringing, a lot of general patient alarms and signals coming from a variety of medical devices to which those patients are dependent. As many of 85 to 99% of these alarm signals might not require clinical intervention. And you can see how this would quite easily create an environment where a critical alarm could be overlooked if 85 to 99% of them can be. Unfortunately, many alarms shouldn't be overlooked. Compared to an ideal case where patients are continuously monitored by caregivers, they're at 3 times greater odds of transfer to ICU or death with conventional vital sign monitoring that creates these buzzings, these beepings, and these constant alarms when you walk through a hospital. Between 2009 and 2012, the Joint Commission received 98 reports of alarm-related adverse patient events. 80 patients died as a result, and 13 suffered permanent loss of function. A separate retrospective linked 216 inpatient deaths to either delayed or absent responses to alarms. Separating noise from important alarms can quite realistically be a matter of life and death for these patients. I think many of us may have even seen this in the hospital if we attend to loved ones, that the alarm can go for minutes and you have to go find someone. Next generation medical devices can actually keep this from happening by enabling constant patient monitoring with a high level of accuracy. So our topic today is the idea that next generation med devices have evolved from simple tools to intelligent integrated systems, thanks to electronics and electromechanical components. This shift provides critical benefits in safety, user experience, and regulatory compliance. The user experience is oftentimes benefited by the integration of electronics, which allows onboarding of medical devices to the Internet of Things, decreasing regulatory risk, and affording us EHR integration with a lot of our common medical devices today. Okay, so I'm going to begin discussion with user interfacing. So the interconnection of patients and providers has been absolutely changed. The landscape has shifted. The Internet of Things has really reshaped the world around us outside of medtech. And we're seeing this drive towards medtech. But we don't want medical systems to be the last to adopt the IoT. This interconnection afforded by the IoT between patients and providers can offer major benefits for patient tracking, data collection, and monitoring. By leveraging the miniaturization of wireless devices, we enable IoT in every corner of the clinical environment. So this has been seen in everyday consumer life, but oftentimes the medical industry can lag behind due to regulatory concerns or cost of development. Ultimately, we think that leveraging the IoT and getting patients onboarded can create a much better environment. Excuse me. So in addition to this IoT and miniaturization that's afforded us by simple developments, and not simple, but insanely complex developments in the silicon libraries that have allowed us for Wi-Fi devices the size of a quarter. We also see that the user experience for patient and clinician can be greatly improved by the integration of electronics. This comes from interfacing directly. This is digital displays, touch screens, haptic feedback on devices. They can really simplify complex procedures and give real-time training and reduce the cognitive load of physicians. So anything from the digital display on a pulse oximeter, allowing for an easier read, the ability to read an infusion pump from across the room, not need to get close and look at a bubble on a gas pump. All of this just makes the doctor's life easier, which overall has been demonstrated time and time again. Decrease the cognitive workload of physicians, increases patient outcomes. It makes it much better for everyone at the hospital if your doctor is able to seamlessly read things, see them from far away, and that extends also to patients. You can imagine that a conventional blood glucose monitor, albeit nowadays they even have simple displays on them. They technically are integrated already, right? They're clunky. There's something you have to carry around with you. You have to prick your finger every 35 minutes or before you eat, check your blood glucose. Nowadays, we've miniaturized the technology that's doing the sensing. That's one arm. And we have these wearable blood glucose monitors. And beyond that, the integration to cell phone apps has just been an enormous landscape shift. We can see beautiful applications that are seamlessly shifting data between patient and provider. They're providing long-term trends. They can even do a little bit of analysis early on to get an idea of where a risk factor might be arising, whether or not there's an important dip in blood glucose. They can kind of tell the patient, hey, this is out of normal. But this miniaturization across the board that we see in everyday life is really only just beginning to impact the medical device industry. This Internet of Things integration, where we're getting these wirelessly enabled internet devices in the tiniest packages we've ever seen, has really only just hit the medical device environment. I don't want to see it lag any longer. The embedded microcontroller units we've seen developed over past years, including but not limited to those by ARM, those by TI, and those by Espressif. The Espresso IDE has been quite helpful in development. These have gotten so small they're the size of a postage stamp for things that might have 5 different antennas inside them. This enables Bluetooth, wireless, near-field communication, RFID, and even really puts a lot of processor power into something your thumbnail. Okay. So we can put any devices on the network with this technology in theory, but a great example of how this can benefit the case we were talking about earlier with all the alarms as you're walking through a hospital being routinely ignored, walked by, overlooked, drowned out by the sounds of others. It can really leverage this technology because centralized nurse station monitoring has just become possible across the board, almost in every sort of sensor you can imagine a patient hooked up to. This does 2 things. One, it makes it so the alarms are no longer something you have to hear and walk to and respond to. And 2, it makes it so one provider can actually directly monitor multiple patients at once. It used to be if you were in the ICU, you'd have 1 or 2 nurses monitoring 1 or 2 beds. Nowadays, you can have one nurse in normal care monitoring about 6, 10, 20, even 30, 50 beds for alarms that she can actually see the direct readout on the screen, and they can respond to that as needed. If it's an unnecessary alarm, they don't have to. If it's a absolutely critical alarm, they'll know right away without getting up to check the patient. So that kind of decreases the time response that these patients are going to need to see before a provider comes in a critical event. And it also allows for really fast triage of those 85 to 99% that are rightfully ignored because the monitor is just going strange, or it's giving a constant alarm for someone who has a very low systolic pressure and it's known. It puts people into a much more ergonomic position, sitting at the desk, not walking around, not out of breath, having to respond to everything. And it allows multiple patients to receive direct access to care by a single nurse. Further than that, off-site and remote monitoring allows for doctors, caregivers, nurses, patients, anything, to be able to quickly intervene and make decisions over long-term monitoring situations. You can imagine these older devices where you would wear potentially a cardiac monitor for weeks at a time, go into the doctor's office at the end of it, give them some sort of small drive. They have to go analyze it, see how you were over the past week. There's no reason that data isn't live streamed now. That data can go straight to the doctor. You can be continuously monitored for this, and they can make clinical decision making if they need to in a rapid sense for patients that maybe have a critical care scenario. Or if it's a long-term chronic disease management, building this enormous data library allows them to make anytime they want to access, they can make an adjustment to your pain medication. Maybe they see a spike in your blood pressure at a certain time and they know that's a result of the pain medication wearing off. They can change the timing of delivery, or even in the future, they could very easily change the way a wearable medical device is behaving based on a wearable sensor without ever having to visit your house, without this lag of weeks before you have to see them and they have to analyze your data. So electronic sensor integration into medical devices has enabled us to have really earlier stage fault detection than we ever did before. So you can imagine that conventional pumps and drug delivery, it was kind of a feed forward control loop. You had a known pressure, you're administering a known amount of drug, but now with the integration of all these electronics and miniaturization of processors and the increasing capabilities generally of electronic sensors, be they optical, electronic, ultrasonic, etc., they've really enabled things like pump fault detection and patient location monitoring in a hospital just much better than they ever could have been. Now we have air and line sensors that are ultrasonically able to detect bubbles down to the size of 0.1 milliliters in line. We can feel pressure changes in the pump that potentially show that you're occluding somewhere in your venous system or on the way to it. All of these can provide alarms that can be fed back towards that nurse's station monitoring, get someone in there to fix the drug pump you might be hooked up to. Or in the other cases, these wearable devices, these kind of like we showed a blood glucose monitor earlier, they can be leveraged for more than they used to be. It used to just be a wearable monitor. Now I can have that check in and notify your hospital caregivers as to which Wi-Fi router you're connected to, potentially localizing which wing of the hospital you're in while you're in a stay or during outpatient care. This is potentially huge for at-home caregiving of elder care, where memory comes into play. People get lost in hospitals, people wander off. Having a traceable location inside the clinical environment allows us to know when someone isn't where they should be, maybe even allows us to build a data set so we know where the bottlenecks are at a hospital. This would be potentially huge. So like I said before too, at-home sensing for long-term pain, cardiac, is totally possible, but I want to add one more really, really intriguing topic. You could have adverse event prediction now, and we're seeing these devices in development right now. We're seeing these start to hit market, but it's taken a little while. I would say since about 2017, a lot of this has been possible, but it's been a reach regulatory wise. It's been maybe a reach to commercialize because of the expense. But there's no reason that the pulmonary monitor that you've been wearing to kind of detect changes or irregularities couldn't notify you potentially minutes before you're having a heart attack or stroke, potentially saving lives, getting someone to take under their tongue nitroglycerin when they're notified immediately that they're in a situation that's going to go sideways really quickly. I've actually worked on some seizure monitor equipment where with already placed catheters inside a brain of a patient with serious seizure disorder, we're able to show between 6 minutes and 50 seconds of prediction on a seizure, which is enormous because now the patient isn't going to fall. They aren't going to be riding a bike. They're going to know I'm about to have a seizure. They can sit down, which oftentimes these secondary traumas are the worst thing that seizure patients suffer who don't have seizures that disrupt their bodily function. This has all just become possible because of our processor intensity, our processor size, and the data processing we have at our fingertips these days. So I'd like to give a simple use case, right? This is pulse oximetry. And it's going to show kind of the impact. I think we've all had these hooked up to our fingers. And probably if you've ever been to the hospital, you've realized that it's one of the first things you see. So imagine several patients enter the emergency department with simple symptoms that potentially could be COVID. Clinicians have to quickly find out whether or not they're experiencing dangerously low blood oxygen levels, which would require immediate intervention, ventilation, oxygen tank hookups, any number of things. Or are they just kind of okay? They need oversight, but nothing major for management. And traditional methods for monitoring that are often invasive, costly, or they're too slow to be used as a front line at the door of the hospital, let's say, at triage. Pulse oximetry devices are now developed as they're really the first stage of triage. If you go to the hospital, they're clipped to your finger immediately, your blood pressure's taken, your pulse ox is taken. Now, it's quite amazing when you realize that this is the first optical medical device that really hit market. After 60 years of having lasers, I know these don't all use lasers, many of them use LEDs at this point, but at 60 years of structured light experiments, we developed a pulse oximeter, never having really seen much small scale optics. Maybe some gamma knives could be considered optical technology in the hospital, but this became ubiquitous across all hospitals. I probably have 2 of these at home between me and my wife. They're everywhere, and they're the first line of defense. So with connectivity, you could even increase the function of these devices. You could give feedback loops for drug administration. There's no reason that anesthesiology pumps don't immediately look at pulse ox readings to know whether or not an adverse event's happening. You could even just change the form factor, and you really are seeing these. There's integration with smartwatches by many of the major brands. I've seen rings, I've seen earrings, and it's because this pulse oximeter can provide contact data. So you can even add the data on there, right? What if it was also giving temperature? What would a map of temperature and blood oxygen look like over a month? How could we use that data to help a patient? How could we use that data to help ourselves with an app? Excuse me, I'm just getting over COVID actually. All right. So patient monitoring itself is fairly important, but now we've gotten to the point where we can monitor and we can do more things with this data than ever before. So all of the devices I've talked about thus far, there's no reason they can't connect to smartphones, tablets, web apps. This allows an open box of development, right? You can get remote configuration, changes to the drug pump, daily, weekly, hourly, minute-wise by the doctors, by the care team. You can monitor patients as they go about the world, even if they're in a different country, still getting the data over the internet, still get, as long as there's internet access, which at this point is most of the world, you can get data back to your primary caregiver. And beyond that, the data visualization is amazing. This isn't a printed out EKG from 60 years ago. It's a needle moving on a piece of paper that needs to be reviewed carefully by a very trained doctor. It can even go further. This can be ported to the patient. This allows integration of all of this collected data through where we're already seeing all of the patient communication with doctors. It's been changed enormously. Now we're all going through these MyChart applications or others. They're patient portals generally, but integrating all of your devices can really create this smooth flow between device, clinician, electronic health record even, and the patient. All visible through a patient portal, all communicable to the doctor. Any level of data scrutiny at an automated level is possible. Any decision making at a potentially AI level would be possible. And importantly, it allows for seamless EHR integration. So by centralizing automated reporting into the EHR, we get this unified clinical set. A lot of hospitals are integrated with digital EHR at this point. I think it's about over 85% in North America. And all of these systems, whether or not you're on Epic or what have you, they do have inbuilt ways which we can speak their language. HL7 is developed in the late 70s as a simple command language so that the format for these messages in EHRs is kind of universal across devices. FHIR is another one. It's the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resource. They're kind of just standards that govern how we would speak to these EHRs, and they enable us to send really a wide and diverse amount of messages in an automated computational way at an API level, an advanced interface. It allows us to communicate with the EHR programmatically. And by doing that, it really eases the ability to integrate. And so we can create devices that are picking out certain parts of data, sending it to the EHR, logging it permanently in a health record that now can be seen by effectively most hospitals when you go visit. They pull your record from these EHRs. This eliminates manual data entry. This is a reduction of clinical errors that result as manual data entry or misinterpretation. And more importantly, and really cool, it provides patient real-time data into EHR, which used to always require on-site patient visits, a doctor to take notes, a doctor to enter them, then to be transcribed, then to be put on the EHR. This allows like a complete and up-to-date picture of a patient's story without leaving the primary EHR system, which is what the physician works in most of the day. So it really streamlines the workflow. And in doing so, it allows us to mitigate regulatory and operational risk across a hospital. So equipment use, excuse me, service and maintenance pose significant risk for hospitals. We don't live in a world where the hospital tort laws that they're often sued under if they ever have adverse events or anything go wrong. We often think in the United States it's innocent until proven guilty, but that's only for criminal law. For civil law, all you need is a preponderance of evidence. So that's, let's say it's the difference between 100% certainty and 51% to get a decision. That creates an issue for a lot of hospitals where you maybe have a device that you have to clean all the time, and that has historically been logged by a nurse. Embedded electronics allow us to never miss that log event because missing it might result in, even if the device was properly cleaned, it might later be blamed for an infection vector. If we have a log that's not able to be tampered with, that can't really be forged, embedded into the workflow by tracking and tracing the device, maybe an RFID tag that allows it to move between, oh, it was picked up off of this desk, it was put into this sanitization oven, it was removed at this time, then it went to X patient. All of that being automated, tracked, and traced really decreases the burden for having to prove whether or not you did clean it. It creates a really infallible audit trail. And service records. They could even get to the point where smarter devices like drug pumps can report their own service history. It can have their own performance log, which would really simplify regulatory inspections, change the way your compliance is achieved with all of these standards. Overall, any of these strategies can really lower regulatory scrutiny, which creates reduced liability for the hospital and more efficient asset management. As a cherry on top, you can just know where every device is. You can know which physician used which device. You can see history of usage. You can pull devices when they're in error. It's very, very interesting how fast we're getting with this kind of tech in a passive manner. Anything I described just now on the device side could be achieved without a battery. The reader side would need electronics. It could be where all the communication goes on, but you could have a simple embedded chip in every plastic molded device that's now tracing it. Here's a use case. Drug identification, being correct or incorrect, is an enormous source of potential error for patients. Got two pumps here. You can see a syringe pump and a cartridge-based pump. Looks like it uses a diaphragm. Imagine a clinical environment where patients are being administered controlled medications, controlled drugs, effectively, with a precise dosage. Let's say it's a small infusion of fentanyl. Physician error on this side can look very small and have an enormous impact on the patient, right? A milliliter or two wrong on a fentanyl solution can kill or maim a patient pretty easily. what if we knew that the correct drug was in the correct pump, and that when you were setting the dosage, that even further was within a relatively normal range for human beings? That idea allows us, or is only allowed by the integration of electronics towards these drug cartridges, right? You could have the drug immediately identified when it's loaded into the pump. It could know this is a fentanyl solution of XYZ concentration, and when it administers to the patient, it could know what's going on almost precisely end to end. The pharmacist could load it, tag it, move it out. Now, when it's loaded in the machine, you can be certain that propofol was not loaded instead of something much more benign, which happens unfortunately in hospitals. It's misidentification of drug. It leads to bad patient outcomes. Beyond that, it can even be logged in the EHR. How much of a drug, from what container, which person packaged it, which caregiver mounted it into the pump. We could refine this drug packaging to use RFID technology to identify exactly what's going on. Long-term caregivers can access patient records that are automatically uploaded by this pump. It can identify drug, batch, lot, pharmacist, nurse, caregiver, amount administered, date administered, time administered, and tell you when you should throw it away. Log all of that to the EHR so that we know that there's no incorrect drug administration. And it could even give you a warning. If it says, hey, EHR says that the doctor ordered lactate, not propofol, it can throw a big warning and tell you to switch the bag. It's a wonderful possibility that would realistically decrease a lot of patient adverse outcomes. Beyond that, integration of electronics into these devices has really increased massively the accuracy over conventional injection. These things are accurate to phenomenally small decimal places, many significant figures. And the sensor, as I discussed before, the sensors inside it that show occlusion, air in line, just failure on the drug container, even leaks. These have just all become effectively commercialized technologies that we can integrate into any number of pumps. An interesting idea that only comes with these pumps being integrated to the internet is that you could have user-based privileges. So the idea that if I badge in as an anesthesiologist, maybe the pump unlocks and I can just press dose, I can just administer doses as much as I want, as I feel is necessary. But if a home care person, if a home care nurse just badges in, maybe they're limited. They can only administer saline. They can only apply dosages that are already in the EHR and called for by a doctor. This privilege elevation really can reduce risk that happens when maybe a caregiver who shouldn't necessarily be administering such a sensitive drug tries to, or if someone loads the wrong drug, or if the patient's been on too long and it really needs to validate with that the pump has been serviced or checked by a physician. You could integrate all of this at a hospital regulatory level, and all of it would be customizable if you told us exactly what you wanted. So with that, I want to get into kind of the paradigm shift that's happening right now. Soft devices are completely new as far as the landscape of medicine goes. So we have a million ways we could make soft devices. They aren't limited, but a very intriguing one that a lot of people have questioned about recently are AI agent integration. So it's a paradigm shift alone that we're having software be a medical device. Beyond that, the idea that an AI agent can help with medical care, it can determine secondary necessity for review, it can even just triage for cognitive workload on doctors. It's an enormous advantage that we're only just seeing devices be developed with. Very few have hit the market. Everyone's scrambling for them. Early FDA software as a medical device guidance provides us risk characterization and really signals near-term acceptance by the FDA of this kind of software-based medical device. So I'm going to just kind of talk, but we're about a AI potentially application, but you could imagine there's a real-time oversight tool that I don't think we're at the point where the FDA is going to accept a robotic doctor. an AI agent being the primary physician. And I think that's actually right at this point in the world. But what if you could use this as an oversight tool that just checks physician diagnosis, right? Maybe suggests alternative considerations that might be missed based on really rapid reading of every data on all of the patients that have ever had similar complaints. Maybe it's just looking at a MRI read and flagging areas of importance that the doctor should recheck if they say nothing's wrong. It can be a second opinion layer. And I think that's a spot where the FDA would be more comfortable with these kind of devices. That said, I think because of this early FDA signaling for these being near-term accepted, I think it's time to start developing all sorts of software-based medical devices. Even ones that potentially could predict patient outcomes, like likelihood of any problem, by just looking at the EHR. This could allow for proactive care and really mitigate a lot of upfront risk that the hospitals face. I want to give a simpler use case than AI as an example here. So web apps and web calculators are medical devices. They are under the software as a medical device guidance now, and they are becoming ubiquitous in the hospital. So to the left, you see an example of a risk calculator that allows a physician to determine the mortality risk of a patient with pulmonary arterial hypertension. It's a rare but life-threatening disease. There's no cure, and treatment options are really limited. That said, treatment options differ greatly if you're on a low-risk group versus if you're on a high risk of mortality group. They're much more aggressive. There's much different drugs involved. And so historically, this exact format was used as a risk assessment tool on a TarePad, a physical thing. They'd do all these tests. They'd take the NT-proBNP value. They'd check them all. They had to do some basic math, add these up, divide by how many. Maybe this is worth 2 points. Maybe that is worth 2 points. They had very critical instructions on the TarePad, but it relied on direct application of mathematics by the physicians. It required on circling the exact correct thing, making sure there's no pen and paper errors. It turns out that's potentially risky, not only because people make math mistakes that are simple sometimes, even when they're engineers, but because it's a cognitive workload issue. Some doctors wouldn't even add up the stuff in human factors analysis. They determined that some doctors would just kind of circle the spots where the patient measurements were, look at it qualitatively and go, you're averaging in the yellow region, so we're going to do X, Y, and Z for your care. And they might not have been. There might have been a simple operation that would have shown that this bumps up to a red, a very high risk patient, or down to a green patient, even though it looks like it's averaging yellow. They've provided a tool that gives a better judgment than just qualitative patient analysis, but it wasn't necessarily being used correctly. So we created multiple web-based calculators that are exactly the same format as the original TarePads, except now you click each of the patient markers, you click their values, and it, in an automated manner, gives you the results. It does all the math for you. It highlights the patient group. It colors the number. It highlights it. You can hit print. You can hand it to the patient just like it was a TarePad that explains to them what their mortality risk is. And you can make clinical decisions based on that lack the cognitive workload of having to do the math itself and lack the potential for human error in the process. And I think that is something that across all sorts of devices, that the integration towards these medical electronics and integrated electronics has really been, there's no doubt in my mind that across the board they're removing human error, whether it's drug pumps, whether it's patient measurement, whether it's patient data collection, whether it's data analysis, or in this case, just simple calculation. Removing human error increases the likelihood of positive outcomes for patients. New technologies could enable more complex calculations using a diverse set of data points that right now we're limiting because the doctor has to give these tests, has to record the results, has to transfer them to a web calculator. I imagine that this sort of technology could be integrated into an EHR oversight tool that's running on the back of an AI agent within 10 years. I actually think you could probably do it this year. It'd probably take a little while to get it through the regulatory system. Okay, I have a long-term vision here. It involves automated centralized reporting, but it starts at the user experience. This has to do with ergonomics, this has to do with displays, this has to do with alarms, all of it. The user experience for clinician and patient can be improved here. We can integrate these devices that are conventionally mechanical, conventionally sitting on a shelf or having to be interfaced with directly by a clinician into the Internet of Things to provide both added benefit to their function and added benefit to the hospital environment as a regulatory agent, decreases the regulatory risk of the hospital sum total by interfacing with centralized reporting on the EHR. I think the future really shows us that we're going to have this situation of fully autonomous medical devices enabling personalized medicine because of these integrated electronics that can be leveraged by AI agents and create this complete data interoperability network. Integrates everything back to the EHR, everything back to the centralized reporting. So anywhere you go, all of the information's there. Anywhere the physician is, it's still there as well. And I'd like to pass it back to John.
Thank you for all that, Michael. So how can we help? We are a contract development and manufacturing organization, and so we have helped our clients develop early stage technologies through commercialization. So for those of you on the call or listening to this recording at a future date, if you have a project where you have an electromechanical device, these types of projects have become a significant part of our service offering. So look forward to hearing from you. Michael, if you could go to the next slide. A little bit more about partnering with Galero. When we approach our electromechanical projects, we work with you to understand what the system architecture looks like. We look at what it takes to integrate seamlessly hardware and software. We work with you to develop compliant electrical engineering solutions and software engineering solutions compliant with 60601 and 62304 standards. We are a very hands-on group of engineers. We will work through both the design and through the early stage prototyping, DV builds, pilot production builds, and ultimately manufacturing transfer. So we're well suited as an end-to-end solution for these complex electromechanical projects. And from there, if we go to the next slide, we'll open it up for a Q&A. Thank you all very much for your time.
Fantastic. So it looks like we do have some questions at the bottom. John, Michael, would you like me to just help kind of read those out, or can you see them? Whatever's up easier for you.
I've got them open right now.
Okay.
John, can I handle the cryptographic question?
Go right ahead. I'm actually looking for them right now.
So I see Chris Myers, for patient privacy, does cryptographic encoding need to be included at the patient sensor? So it actually does not need to be included at the sensor level. Now, if that data is passed over the air towards the EHR, as I've described, that's where all of this cryptography gets important. And overall, most hospitals already have secured Wi-Fi. It's less about cryptography applications directly. The FDA doesn't quite give great guidance about that, but it is about patient data storage and privacy, extremely critical that these things are not traced back to de-anonymized patient data. Currently, HL7 itself doesn't even really use cryptography for its signals. It sends these messages open air, and the network security itself is the backbone. Storage, completely different answer. Storage of these needs to be done on accredited drives. That said, nowadays, a lot of the big box cloud operators are offering medtech ready solutions. So you can look at like Azure has a medical device HIPAA compliant enabled virtual machine system that you can use right out the gate.
Michael, can I ask a real quick follow-up on that? So you said that the FDA doesn't necessarily have the most comprehensive guidance. Just curious about your thoughts. How do people get started with this type of thing when the guidance isn't as clear? What are you kind of leaning towards as best practices? How do you approach that? Because I think that could be really helpful.
I think that the guidance has been increasingly getting better. I wouldn't say it's, 5 years ago, there was almost nothing for software as a medical device. Now it's all there. I think that it's really following trade familiarity is the best way, and keeping secure data, in this case, in this specific question case, it's all going to be governed under HIPAA. So if you're HIPAA compliant already with your internet infrastructure, there should be really a smooth onboarding of an integrated device there. We at Galero do quite a lot of cybersecurity analysis when we're making any integrated devices. You can imagine that the ability to even connect to a drug pump with a USB drive is extremely scrutinized on our side. And oftentimes we have physical interlocks that disable this kind of stuff. The guidance side, it's getting better. It's really working through the pre-subs and getting your direct questions answered. And I think industry experience is a really big leverage. Like the fact that John and myself have led teams to do this kind of stuff before, a lot of times we've seen the pitfalls that don't come up until a late stage review with the FDA with regard to cybersecurity.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I see this next question. It's do you have a point of view of cloud-based versus edge computing architectures to provide optimum security protocols? So I would say directly that you can do either. I personally think it really has to do with your application. I don't want to give too general of an answer. So I would say, like I said before, there are major cloud operators who are providing end-to-end solutions that are already available turnkey. It depends on your data size, though. If you're asking me as an engineer, I think edge computing is awesome. I think it creates a lot more difficult of an environment to validate patient HIPAA security. But that said, I think integrating both is really where we're going. I think we're getting to this point where some devices are doing some of the work on an edge case, and then maybe data storage, centralized data storage, is on a cloud. You can see that these EHR systems are oftentimes working on locally hosted network access servers, but some of them are starting to go towards cloud because of these MyChart integration and all of this. I have a personal bias towards cloud technologies, but I don't want that to be seen as anything other than a personal bias.
That's great. I want to put an all call out there for any last questions. I mean, I think if I may add, when I look at this type of work, and I think this was an excellent presentation, so thank you both so much for going through the details on this. The challenge we've seen with a lot of medical device companies that we're dealing with is just the understanding of the business case around so many of the things that you've talked about today, and how they're really selling that, especially if they're working with device that's going to be used in hospital. And, any thoughts you all have about the acceptance, resistance, where you're seeing faces light up and where you're also seeing conversations like, oh, yeah, that's not going to happen. I think that might be really interesting too.
I kind of touched on one. I think that people are eager for AI doctors, and I don't think that that's ready. I don't think that we're at a clinical environment where that would ever be acceptable because of the way we regulate physicians themselves. That's one that I always have to have trouble with. And I do think we're at the point, though, where integrating AI technologies has become possible as a second integration layer. And I see people, especially for those startups on the call, I see venture capital light up with two keywords this past 2 years: AI, medtech, and software as a service. If those go together, I see just crazy amounts of success in funding. That said, I see too many people coming and trying to force AI into a problem where it's not necessary. Overall, for adoption of devices, I think nurses are your best bet. I've seen so many devices that maybe even doctors developed that they're great. They have an awesome application. They would increase, benefit patients, and they put them in a nurse's hand and they go, "We're never doing it." And that is the end. That is a coffin nail. But I've seen the reverse. Doctors go, "Oh, we don't need another device for that." 6 nurses say they do, and it's a bestseller in a month because they're who drives this, right? You got what's the nurse to doctor ratio at a given care environment? I've been in chemo rooms where it's maybe 15 to 30 to 1. It's unbelievably asymmetrical. So if you get a device a nurse wants, a nurse says she will use or he will use over top of a conventional device, those are winners.
Okay, you do actually have a few more questions in the chat. I think that spurred excitement.
Yeah, I see this. So I'm going to answer them in order, I think. John, hop in if I ever should stop answering, but
No, go for it, Michael. Go for it.
All right. So I see that this question about SAMD guidance and HIPAA with cybersecurity. So the SAMD guidance doesn't provide the cybersecurity guidance. So there is a separate guidance document about cybersecurity. There are separate standards we're beholden to. I believe that you can do almost anything in a secure manner. That comes from a programming background. That comes from a cloud computing background when I say that. It takes more work. It takes a lot of scrutiny. We have a dedicated software quality department that assesses cybersecurity at every step of our development. It can be as simple as a firmware problem. It can be as complex as commercially available Bluetooth devices that someone can pair to on accident that are not their medical device. We see all of it and we have to think about all of it. I think there's not the best guidance for cybersecurity still, though it is very much there embedded in the HIPAA documentation. It's not in the SAMD guidance, though, if that's what you're directly asking. That's more about risk. It's about what constitutes a medical device in context of software. And it actually follows a different pattern than the class 1, class 2, class 3 device that we're normally looking at. Going on that one, I'm going to go to the next. Who are the real economic buyers in the healthcare system for this technology? Everybody. I think that hospitals are the biggest market. I think doctors are a huge market. And like I said before, nurses are a massive market. Buyers, it depends on the care setting, right? A lot of individualized home care is run a lot smaller. They're run through distribution houses. Those houses can be a major buyer. I know dental has one centralized distribution office that if you get into, it's kind of like being on Amazon for dentists. It depends on your device. So I don't want to give too much detail there because I need to know a lot more about your device, but please reach out. Is there a place for diagnostic software without embedded hardware at the nursing station? Absolutely. I think that's what I was trying to get at with my paradigm shift, and that's what we would call a software device. So I think that diagnostic software is the most recently accepted stuff by the FDA that 10 years ago when I was first working on a lot of medical devices, you couldn't do it. There was no pathway by which software became a medical device, and it was a real weird gray market back then because there were some software medical devices. Since then, guidance has gotten better, and we know a lot more about it. I can absolutely imagine you have a diagnostic software, whether it's running at a nurse's station, running in a doctor's computer, running on a web app that is consumer facing. I think you could have diagnostic aids at this point in any of those embodiments. All right, Christian Fitzgerald, I've got in the case where a fully or partially automated medical device is responsible for an error that leads to an adverse patient outcome, who typically bears liability? So it's a complex question. I don't want to give too confident of an answer, but right now it's the same as medical devices as such, the company who developed the medical device. That's as simple as I want to go right now. If you make a bone cutter right now and your bone cutter fails, if it's the physician's failure, that's their fault. If the bone cutter is to blame, that's your fault as a company. That's what our DV testing, we use a phase design approach. We go through an immense amount of testing before any devices, software, hardware, or otherwise hit the market, so we avoid these. But liability is brutal in medical devices. Make sure everything works beforehand. I appreciate Joseph Sharp just typing thank you. You're very welcome. It's been my pleasure.
I think those were excellent questions and very well answered. I do think for the liability question, if you go back on our YouTube page, there is some of my favorite webinars we've done and some of my favorite FDA conversations are around the liability conversation. There are one or two on there if you'd like to take a look. Honestly, liability is terrifying. So
it's a whole webinar. That's why I'm like,
yeah.
The answer is complex and guard yourself at every step. And that's what all of the testing's for. But it is a master's thesis to understand.
100%. And I think you answered that well as the you need to know a little bit more, but just assume it's your fault. Like just assume the liability is on you at every step of the way as the person putting the product onto the market.
That's
So
what the FDA is for.
Exactly. We are right up on time, and it looks like we've answered all the questions. So I just want to maybe say thank you to Michael and John for putting this together. This has been an excellent presentation. And for all of you joining us, as we said, we will share the link so that you can review this in your own time. And please feel free to share it with others who you think would be valuable. I encourage you to reach out to these guys with any questions. Obviously, their breadth of information is very incredible. So they'll be able to help with anything that you need. So thank you, everyone, and I hope to see you soon at another Mass Medic event.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you very much, Rachel. Thank you,
Have a
everyone.
good one. Bye-bye.